Welcome to Whispered Tales, where every story helps you learn and grow. Today, we explore the real reason you forget vocabulary and how to fix it. Lila Thompson had always struggled with memorizing English vocabulary. She would spend hours studying lists of words, making flashcards, and repeating definitions aloud, but the next day, most of it seemed to vanish from memory. Frustration grew with each attempt, leaving her doubting her learning abilities. She had read countless tips about memorization, but nothing seemed to stick. It wasn't until she began reflecting on her habits that she discovered the real reason words were slipping away: lack of connection and meaningful usage. Unlike rote memorization, the human brain remembers best when words are associated with context, emotion, or personal experience. Lila realized that simply repeating words or writing definitions was not enough. Vocabulary needed to be lived, applied, and connected to her daily experiences. This insight changed everything. She began experimenting with techniques that involved active usage rather than passive memorization, starting with simple daily reflections. Each day, she would try to use 3 new words in conversation, journal entries, or even mental narration of her day. At first, the change was subtle. Some words stuck immediately, others required repetition in meaningful contexts. Lila also noticed that spacing repetitions over time helped her memory. Rather than cramming words in a single session, revisiting them across days strengthened retention. More importantly, she discovered that emotion and engagement amplified memory. Words she used to describe feelings, events, or vivid imagery became far easier to recall than abstract lists. The journey to mastering vocabulary, she realized, wasn't about quantity, it was about depth, connection, and context. Lila decided to implement a structured yet dynamic approach to vocabulary learning. She began keeping a small notebook, not for rote definitions, but for real-life usage examples. Each new word she encountered had to be written in a sentence that described her day, her thoughts, or an imagined scenario. For instance, instead of simply memorizing the word elated, she wrote, "I felt elated when I finished my presentation perfectly." The emotion attached to the word made it instantly more memorable. She also discovered the power of visual associations. Linking a word to an image, a gesture, or a scene created a stronger neural connection than repetition alone. For meticulous, she imagined her friend arranging books on a shelf with extreme precision. For melancholy, she pictured a rainy afternoon sitting by the window with a book. These vivid mental pictures turned abstract words into living concepts, making recall far easier during conversation or writing. Lila experimented with daily speaking practice, narrating her actions and thoughts in English while consciously using new vocabulary. Walking through her neighborhood, she would describe things aloud. "The autumn leaves are crisp and brittle, creating a crunchy carpet on the path." Gradually, her brain began storing vocabulary as usable language rather than isolated definitions. By the end of this chapter, she understood a critical principle. Memorization fails when words are isolated. Words stick when they are connected to life, context, and emotion. As Lila's routine continued, she noticed another key factor influencing vocabulary retention: active recall versus passive recognition. For years, she had been practicing by reading lists or reviewing flashcards, which only tested recognition. The brain would say, "Yes, I know this word," without truly retrieving it from memory. To fix this, she started self-quizzing, attempting to recall words without looking at notes. Sometimes she failed, but these failures were valuable. They strengthened memory through active engagement. She also realized that spacing repetitions strategically made learning more effective. Revisiting words after a day, a week, or a month allowed her brain to solidify long-term retention. This approach, combined with active recall, created a robust framework for vocabulary mastery. She began grouping words thematically: emotions, work, daily life, which helped her contextualize and connect ideas more naturally. Lila's practice soon extended to real conversations. Whenever she spoke with friends or colleagues, she deliberately integrated new vocabulary, testing recall under natural conditions. Mistakes sometimes occurred, but each one became a learning opportunity. Using words in authentic contexts, paired with reflection and repetition, transformed passive knowledge into active fluency. By the end of this chapter, Lila realized that the reason vocabulary was often forgotten wasn't laziness or inability, it was lack of meaningful, repeated, and contextual engagement. Lila's next discovery was the importance of emotionally engaging with words. She noticed that words linked to feelings, experiences, or personal stories were easier to remember than abstract or neutral terms. For instance, learning the word exhilarated while describing a thrilling bike ride made it far more memorable than memorizing a dictionary definition. She began attaching words to experiences, journaling, or even small creative exercises like writing mini stories using new vocabulary. The emotional connection created a strong mental anchor, making recall almost effortless. She also experimented with multisensory learning techniques. Listening to words in context through podcasts or songs, speaking them aloud, and visualizing scenarios simultaneously strengthened memory. For example, listening to a story while imagining the scene and repeating key words aloud created layers of reinforcement. Lila realized that engaging multiple senses not only made learning enjoyable, but also increased retention. In addition, Lila embraced peer interaction as a tool. She joined a small English discussion group where each member would share a sentence using a new word daily. Speaking the word aloud, hearing it used in conversation, and receiving feedback from peers reinforced her learning. Over time, Lila noticed a dramatic improvement. Words she previously forgot after a day now stayed with her, ready to be used naturally in conversation or writing. By the end of this chapter, she had internalized a core principle. Words are remembered when they are lived, felt, and applied repeatedly. Lila's next insight came from observing how the brain naturally stores and retrieves information. She learned that memory is strengthened by repeated exposure in varied contexts, not just repetition in the same way. To leverage this, she began encountering new words across different activities: reading articles, listening to podcasts, writing reflections, and speaking with friends. Each context offered a unique connection to the word, deepening retention. For example, encountering the word ambiguous in a news article, discussing it in conversation, and then writing a sentence about it made it nearly impossible to forget. She also embraced active recall with creativity. Instead of asking herself simple definition questions, she would challenge herself. How can I use this word in a story, conversation, or real-life scenario? This method forced her brain to create meaningful links, making the vocabulary functional rather than theoretical. Over time, she noticed that even difficult words became accessible naturally because they were embedded in experiences rather than memorized lists. Lila's approach evolved further when she began reflecting on errors. Whenever she misused a word or forgot it during conversation, she would write down the mistake, create a corrected sentence, and revisit it multiple times over the following days. This feedback loop transformed mistakes into opportunities for durable learning. By the end of this chapter, she realized that the real reason vocabulary is forgotten is lack of meaningful, repeated, and varied engagement. And the solution is to make every word alive through context, creativity, and reflection. With consistent practice, Lila discovered the importance of spaced repetition combined with active life integration. She no longer relied on memorization sessions alone. Instead, she spaced out reviewing words across hours, days, and weeks while deliberately applying them in real-life situations. Words like exquisite or tenacious became part of her emails, diary entries, and even casual conversations. By encountering the same words repeatedly in diverse contexts, her retention strengthened dramatically. Lila also experimented with emotional reinforcement. She noticed that words tied to meaningful events or personal experiences stuck far longer. For instance, after using elated to describe her promotion at work, she never forgot it. Associating vocabulary with positive or emotionally charged experiences created mental anchors, making recall effortless. This approach transformed vocabulary from abstract knowledge into living, usable language. To further reinforce her learning, Lila set daily challenges. Each day, she would integrate at least 5 new words into her communication, both written and spoken. Some days she struggled, but consistent effort created a habit of active engagement. Mistakes were no longer setbacks, they were reminders of learning in progress. By the end of this chapter, Lila had internalized a fundamental principle. Vocabulary is forgotten when disconnected from life, and it is remembered when integrated, emotionally charged, and consistently used. Lila's journey led her to another crucial realization: the power of context and meaningful sentences. Instead of memorizing isolated words, she began focusing on phrases and sentences where the words naturally belonged. For example, learning meticulous within the sentence, "She is meticulous when organizing her art supplies," made it easier to remember than simply defining the word. Context not only improved recall, but also helped her understand how words functioned grammatically and socially. She also began visualizing words in real-life scenarios. For serene, she imagined a calm lakeside morning. For astute, she pictured a friend analyzing a complex problem effectively. Visualization made words tangible, linking mental imagery to meaning. Lila noticed that words tied to vivid mental images were recalled effortlessly, even weeks after first encountering them. Additionally, Lila embraced storytelling as a tool for retention. She created short narratives using her new vocabulary, incorporating daily events or fictional scenarios. Speaking or writing these stories aloud strengthened recall and built natural fluency. Over time, her vocabulary no longer felt like a list to memorize. It was a living, functional part of her communication toolkit. By the end of this chapter, Lila had unlocked a key insight. Words are remembered when used in context, visualized, and woven into stories that matter to you. As Lila progressed, she began to see the importance of teaching and sharing words with others. Whenever she explained the meaning of a word to a friend or used it in a conversation, her brain was forced to actively retrieve and apply it. This process of teaching solidified her understanding and made recall almost automatic. Words that once slipped away now stayed permanently because they were reinforced through communication and social interaction. She also explored mixing new vocabulary with old words. Instead of practicing new words in isolation, Lila created sentences and stories that combined them with words she already knew. For example, using elated alongside familiar words in a story about a celebration reinforced both new and existing vocabulary. This technique created a network of connected words in her mind, making recall easier and faster. Furthermore, Leela realized that engaging multiple senses enhanced retention. She would say words aloud, write them, visualize them, and sometimes even act out scenarios. For instance, practicing flutter by imagining a bird in her hand or mimicking the movement made the word unforgettable. By the end of this chapter, she understood that the reason words were forgotten was that most learners rely solely on reading or passive memorization. The solution was active usage, multisensory engagement, and meaningful application in daily life. Leela's next realization centered on consistency and daily integration. Learning vocabulary once a week or in occasional bursts had limited impact. Instead, she committed to embedding words into every part of her day. Morning journaling, casual conversations, work emails, and reflections before sleep became opportunities to recall and apply vocabulary. This constant repetition in meaningful contexts strengthened her memory far more effectively than any isolated study session. She also adopted micro-habits for vocabulary retention. While waiting for the bus, cooking, or walking, she would mentally rehearse new words, create quick sentences, or imagine scenarios where she could use them. Over time, this practice became automatic, and words naturally surfaced when speaking or writing. Leela realized that even brief, frequent engagement could produce long-lasting retention. Finally, she understood the importance of reflection and correction. Whenever she misused a word or forgot one during conversation, she made a note, practiced it in context, and revisited it later. Mistakes were no longer discouraging, they were valuable opportunities for reinforcement. By the end of this chapter, Leela had embraced a vital lesson. Forgetting vocabulary is normal, but using, applying, and reflecting on words daily creates permanent mastery. Leela's approach evolved further when she explored the importance of emotional connection in memory. She realized that words tied to strong feelings or personal experiences were retained far longer than neutral words. For example, the word triumphant became unforgettable when she used it to describe her excitement after completing a challenging project. By connecting vocabulary to emotions, joy, frustration, excitement, or curiosity, Leela made her learning deeply personal and memorable. She also experimented with creative exercises like writing short stories or dialogues using new vocabulary. Each word was not just repeated, but woven into meaningful narratives, enhancing recall. The process made learning enjoyable and engaging rather than a tedious task. She noticed that words embedded in stories became effortless to retrieve in conversation or writing. Additionally, Leela embraced feedback and correction from peers. Sharing sentences or stories with friends and asking for corrections helped identify subtle errors, clarify usage, and reinforce memory. Each discussion strengthened her ability to use words naturally and confidently, transforming passive recognition into active fluency. By the end of this chapter, Leela had internalized a powerful truth. Vocabulary is forgotten when detached from meaning, emotion, and use, but retained when applied, shared, and emotionally anchored. Leela's next focus was on integration and daily thinking in English. She realized that her memory improved when she didn't just study words, but actively thought in English throughout the day. From planning her schedule to reflecting on experiences, she narrated her thoughts using new and familiar vocabulary. This mental rehearsal strengthened recall, making words accessible when speaking or writing. Thinking in English became a habit, transforming her learning into a continuous, effortless process. She also explored contextual reinforcement through media. Listening to podcasts, watching movies, and reading articles in English exposed her to natural usage of words in varied situations. Hearing and seeing words in context helped her internalize nuances, idiomatic expressions, and sentence structures. She would pause, repeat, and create sentences to cement her understanding. Over time, vocabulary became not just memorized, but internalized and adaptable. Finally, Leela embraced reflection as a tool for mastery. At the end of each day, she reviewed new words, recited sentences, and reflected on moments where she had used them successfully or forgotten them. This habit made learning self-correcting and progressive. By the end of this chapter, she had fully grasped the principle that forgetting vocabulary is natural, but persistent, contextual, and reflective practice transforms memory into fluency. Leela now focused on combining vocabulary with active writing. She discovered that writing essays, personal reflections, or even social media posts in English created another layer of reinforcement. Each word she used in her own sentences strengthened her recall and allowed her to experiment with nuances and tone. Unlike memorization, writing demanded creativity and precision, forcing her brain to process words deeply. Words were no longer abstract items, they became tools for expression. She also explored storytelling as a bridge for memory. Leela created short fictional stories where she integrated newly learned words seamlessly. Characters, plots, and dialogues provided natural contexts for vocabulary, making recall effortless. Words like resilient, captivating, or astonished became part of her expressive toolkit, easily recalled in conversation, writing, or self-reflection. Another key discovery was the value of teaching vocabulary. Explaining words to friends, correcting their usage, or creating mini-quizzes reinforced her own learning. Leela noticed that teaching required her to articulate meaning clearly, retrieve words actively, and contextualize them, strengthening her memory far more effectively than studying alone. By the end of this chapter, she had understood a vital truth. Vocabulary retention comes from active use, creative integration, and shared learning, not passive memorization. Leela's journey now highlighted the importance of variety in learning contexts. She realized that encountering a word in multiple situations, conversation, reading, writing, or listening, made it far more memorable. For example, the word inquisitive stuck when she read it in a novel, used it in a journal entry, and then described a colleague's curiosity during a discussion. The repeated exposure across contexts reinforced neural pathways, making recall almost automatic. She also embraced active gamification techniques. Leela created small challenges for herself, like using 3 new words in a conversation before lunch, or crafting a short story using all new vocabulary words for the day. These fun exercises made learning engaging and memorable, while also strengthening her ability to retrieve words under real-life conditions. Additionally, she learned to track progress and reflect on growth. Leela maintained a vocabulary journal, noting words that she could confidently use and those that needed more practice. Seeing tangible improvement motivated her to continue, and occasional lapses became part of the learning process rather than discouragements. By the end of this chapter, she had internalized a crucial principle. Vocabulary retention happens when learning is passive or disconnected, but retention thrives when words are engaged actively, creatively, and in varied contexts. By now, Leela had transformed her approach to vocabulary learning completely. She understood that the real reason words are forgotten is that they are often studied in isolation, without meaningful connection, context, or active usage. Through journaling, storytelling, teaching, visualization, emotional engagement, and consistent practice, she had developed a system where words naturally stayed in her memory and became ready tools for expression. Her daily life was now infused with English. She thought in English during planning, described experiences in English while journaling, and used new words in conversations with friends and colleagues. Vocabulary was no longer a chore. It had become an integral part of her communication, creativity, and confidence. Mistakes were welcomed as feedback, and every interaction was an opportunity for reinforcement. The journey taught Leela an essential lesson. Memorization alone is insufficient. True retention comes from making vocabulary meaningful, integrated, and alive in daily life. By living with words, reflecting on them, and using them creatively, she had mastered not just vocabulary, but a mindset for lifelong learning. Thank you for joining us today on Whisped Tales. Leela's story reveals why we often forget vocabulary and, more importantly, how we can fix it by making words active, meaningful, and part of everyday life. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories and practical life lessons. Next time, we'll bring you another tale that helps you grow, learn, and master English naturally. Remember, don't just memorize words, use them, feel them, and live with them every day.